Hello, everyone, and welcome to one more of our sessions of Literary Talks Chats sobre Literatura. This is a project, an extension project of Universidade Federal do Mato Grosso do Sul, and it's connected to our course, Literaturas de Língua Inglesa Contemporânea, Literaturas Contemporâneas em Língua Inglesa, Contemporary Literature in English. And we have this project to invite people that are related to literature because they write, because they edit, because they um, somehow uh, 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 translate as well. Or okay, sorry, I think I froze here. Did you
Yep, your connection
did
went
you
a
see
bit
that?
shaky there.
Okay, I'm back. So yeah, so I'm going to now give the word to the girls, the group who is going to interview our dear guest, Lauren Beukes. Um, you?
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me on.
Hi, so our pleasure to meet you, and I'm gonna introduce you a little bit for our viewers. So, Lauren Beukes is a South African novelist, short story writer, journalist, and television scriptwriter. Uh, she is the award-winning and internationally best-selling South African author of The Shining Girls, City and Afterland, among other works. Her novels have been published in 24 countries and are being adapted for film and TV. She is also a comics writer, screenwriter, journalist, and documentary maker. So today we're gonna talk about her work. Um, we're gonna focus on the short story "Sleeping," and we made some questions to know about the creation of this short story, and we want to know some curiosities about the, the process of creation and so on. So we're gonna start reading our questions to you. My name is Gabriela.
My name is Raíssa.
Nice to meet you.
Ela?
And I'm Juliana. It's nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet all of you. Thanks for having me on.
So first of all, what sparked your initial interest in writing? In writing.
Yeah, I've wanted to be a writer since I was 5 years old, and I found out that that was a job that you could have, that you get paid to make up stories. And at 5, that sounded like really fun, like being an astronaut or a vet, or I don't know what else kids dream about being. Um, and I didn't realize how hard it would be or how lonely it would be. But I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to be a full-time writer, to be able to like actually get paid and make a living from my writing. It is difficult. You would think it would get easier with every book, but it doesn't. It's still like a really tough process, to kind of pull out this story from your head and make it all make sense and make it hang together and kind of see where these characters go. But I've always loved storytelling, and I've always loved storytelling as a way of kind of exploring who we are in the world. So big social issues, but also how do we deal with trouble? How do we deal with strife? How do we deal with kind of the bad things that happen to us, or the bad things that maybe we do and we have to try and recover from and redeem ourselves.
Okay, that's really nice. Second question. How do you balance elements of fantasy and reality in your storytelling?
I wish I had a very good way, like an instruction or a rule of thumb or something that you guys could take away and use. For me, it's very intuitive. I grew up under apartheid, which of course was the system in South Africa where Black people were denied the vote, denied a proper education. They had, terrible. There were terrible human rights violations. People were murdered and tortured, and also there was a lot of censorship. So, which I think we're seeing in places like the US right now, where there's book bannings happening. So in South Africa, you weren't allowed to write about what was going on. And a lot of playwrights and people who were involved in the theater started making very allegorical plays. So they would do kind of these weird fantasies with puppets, or kind of explore the big issues, but without talking about them directly. And I think that was a huge influence on me, where I was like, oh, you can tell like a really weird, interesting, cool story about Parktown prawns, which is a kind of king cricket, but really it's an allegory for apartheid and kind of the system of political injustice. And also, I read a lot of comics. I read a very political British comic called 2000 AD. And so I think it just comes intuitively. I have a big weird idea, but I want to use that idea as a way of kind of exploring the things which are really important to me and really important to my politics. And that's usually around the lines of kind of social justice and sexism and, well, let's say feminism, supporting Black rights, looking at the injustices of history, gay rights, trans rights. These are all things that are really important to me that come through in my writing. And then I might explore that through a time-traveling serial killer or a girl who has blades for legs and is trying to run in a race where everyone's trying to exploit her.
That's lovely. Thank you.
That's nice.
Please tell me.
No, that's nice. And Lauren, can you describe your writing process when developing characters?
Again, it's quite intuitive. I often have kind of a strong sense of the character's voice. So it might start with a strong image or a strong sense of voice. With my novel Zoo City, I had this image of a young woman going to a wardrobe and pulling out a sloth, which kind of climbs onto her back. And I was like, what does this mean? And I was like, oh, it means that, it's kind of the possibility of redemption, but it's also her guilt. Sometimes I'll have a very strong sense of the character's voice and they'll just start talking, and I'll just start writing. And often they're quite witty. They're using humor as a self-defense mechanism. They're kind of a little bit cynical, but also have quite a strong heart as well. So yeah, it's kind of through process. It's through the writing. It's kind of finding the characters. And also I think what's really important is letting the characters make mistakes and, really leaning into exactly who they are. So in my first novel, Moxieland, there's a character who's an activist, and he's very headstrong and he's very stubborn and he's very passionate about the cause. And that, of course, leads him to make these terrible mistakes. And you kind of want to grab him and say, no, don't do that. But if you want to have a compelling story, you have to let your characters follow who they are. And ideally, you probably need to put them in those terrible situations where they're going to make the bad choices.
That's amazing. I think sometimes the character represents the society itself, right? So next question. What role does research play in your writing process?
Research is my favorite part of the writing process because it doesn't involve any writing. I find writing, like I said, I find it hard and I find it lonely, and I will do anything to avoid actual writing. I like having written the story, and often, if I'm going to dip into a little bit of writing advice here, the thing is to just write anyway. Like, even if you don't feel it, like set a timer and just start writing, and maybe you'll get into flow and then it'll be amazing. Or maybe you'll only get one decent sentence, and that's okay, because you at least have one decent sentence that you can move on with tomorrow. Sorry, what was the question? I went off on a tangent.
What role does research play?
Oh yes, research. Yes.
Writing process?
So I was a journalist for a very long time, and I got to do really cool stories in South Africa, which, is still like a society where there's a big divide between the rich and poor. It's got the highest Gini coefficient in the world, which is the divide between rich and poor. We struggle with a lot of social issues still. And some of the journalism I did was kind of dumb lifestyle journalism about I don't know, women who get revenge on their partners for Cosmopolitan magazine. But it might also be something like, I covered the Miss HIV positive beauty pageant in Botswana, and I interviewed unhoused sex workers. So I got to talk to all these different people from all these different kind of stratosphere of society. And I think that really plays into my work as well, is having been a journalist, having seen all these different parts of the world that are often quite uncomfortable, very far removed from my own experience. And that helps me understand society, but also other lives. And I think what's really interesting is other minds. So I know that, it's quite a common path for people to go through journalism to become novelists. I think one of the things it prepares you for is journalism is terribly underpaid and under threat, and fiction is terribly underpaid and under threat. So, if you want to have an uncertain life in the arts, good way to do it. But journalism, I spent hours and hours and hours interviewing people, and then I spent even more hours listening to the tapes because, back in the day, I had an old dictaphone with a tape recorder. And I would sit there and I would have to type up the interviews. And what that meant was you're really listening to how people speak and how they speak differently. And I think that's one of my favorite things to write is dialogue. And I think I'm pretty good at dialogue because I've spent all this time interviewing people, hearing how they speak differently. And you're listening for the words which tell you something about the character, and maybe something that they didn't mean to say. I interviewed an HIV positive couple in South Africa, and they, as a journalist, and they talked about how love is an infection. And I was like, I couldn't have come up with that. That's just a weird thing. And recently I was doing research in Detroit, and I met this property developer. And he was this very tall man with like a shaved head. And he came to meet us to talk about like how he developed, downtown Detroit. And he was wearing sunglasses, and he didn't take his sunglasses off. He was just like a really cool, but like really kind of, intimidating kind of guy. And in the middle of talking to us, we're sitting outside at a table, and he just smacks his hand down on the table and kills a hornet about this big with his bare hand. And I'm like, that is such a great character note. But I think it's too good a character note. I actually couldn't put it into fiction because people would be like, that's a bit much, don't you think? This man just kills hornets with his bare hand and doesn't even think about it. I'm like, yeah. So I think the research really shows you that. But also, I spent time hanging out with cops and interviewing detectives and talking to artists and kind of exploring the city. And research shows you other sides of things. It shows you kind of a real sense of how people live and what the big issues are. And it's also so much fun, and it gives you weird details. And that, again, you just haven't been able to imagine on your own. Or certainly I wouldn't have been able to imagine on my own. Because I think that comes back to one of the first questions is how do I balance kind of like genre and like real issues or literary and genre? And that is by balancing it with these real details, by trying to make everything else as real as possible. So if you have an idea like a time traveling serial killer, that's a really exciting, weird concept. But then I do a deep dive into the rest of the research because I want everything else to feel really real. And I want to talk about the real things which are going on.
And did you expect to be read in Brazil when you were thinking about your public and your readers?
It's amazing to be read in Brazil. I think the fact that Wagner Moura is in the Shiny Girls TV show has probably helped quite a lot. But even before that, the Shiny Girls was published in Brazil. It's amazing. I feel a lot of, obviously, connection because we're both Global South. I've only been to Brazil when I was 5 years old, so I really need to come back. But I've been to Argentina and kind of hung out with writers like Mariana Enriquez. And I feel like a really strong sense of connection to South America in general and like Brazil in particular. It's really, really cool to like be read in other countries, to have other people resonate. I think maybe it's because we're both kind of developing countries in, severe inverted commas, and we have the same kinds of social issues that maybe my writing speaks into that. I do have a comic set in Brazil, actually, in Sao Paulo. So I must send that to your lecturer. Yeah, it's a very short comic. It was just a short 8 pages, but yeah.
We would love to see it.
We hope that you come visit us sometime here in Brazil.
I would love
to. So now the questions will be about your short story, Slipping. We read the translation, but we also have the Omenana magazine page. So we had both versions. So first question is, what inspired you to write Slipping, and how did the idea evolve during the writing process?
So I think Slipping is probably one of my most personal stories. Although it's a young Black woman, a young Black girl, really. I think she's really struggling with success and kind of the pressures of it, which is kind of the place that I was writing from. I think I wrote it when the Shiny Girls had come out, and suddenly this book was this global phenomenon, and the film and TV rights have been bought, and I was going on tour to like all these different countries, and it just felt so overwhelming. And I was kind of losing a sense of myself, and I was never at home anymore. So I think that was a big kind of strong part of the motivation. But, so Pearl grew up very poor in kind of the townships in South Africa. And I'm always writing into social injustice. I'm always writing into feminism. I'm always writing into kind of like race and how people are discriminated against. So I really wanted to kind of look at this idea of this girl who's given this incredible opportunity, but it's already come at a terrible cost because, she was so ambitious and inspiring that she kind of raced a train and lost her legs. But now she is in the situation where she's on the global stage, but it kind of feels like everyone's kind of using her, and she's trying to find a way to connect with other people.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Very interesting. What is your writing process like for Sleeping? Did you face any particular challenges while crafting this history? Tell me
I
more
did
about
not
that.
want to write this story. I tried to get out of it so many times. There's a famous cyberpunk writer called Bruce Sterling. He's one of the original people who came up with cyberpunk, and he's also just an amazing science fiction writer. And he was editing MIT, so that's the Michigan Institute of Technology. Their kind of 12 Tomorrows. It's their kind of fiction anthology which comes out. And he'd commissioned me, and I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. I'm dealing with all this pressure. I'm basically having a nervous breakdown. I don't want to do this. I'm getting divorced. Like, please don't make me write this story. And he's like, you got to write this story. So I think I took all of kind of, the churn and the turmoil that I was going through and kind of put it into it. Kind of have to force my way into a story, like obviously like there's a sense of voice and there's a sense of the character, but I think I was already very interested in kind of exploitation. I was really interested in, gosh, when did this come out originally? Yeah, I mean, I guess it would have been after Ria Steenkamp. So, obviously the Blades are inspired by Oscar Pistorius, who is South Africa's Paralympian, who then murdered his girlfriend and tried to pretend it was because he was afraid of a Black home invader. So there were all these like weird things around racism and kind of, but also femicide and the fact that it affects everyone in South Africa. But also Caster Semenya is one of our most amazing athletes. She's a runner, and she has faced the most grotesque and disgusting gender tests to prove that she's a woman and can run and can compete in the women's races, which I think is something which especially happens to female athletes of color. And we've seen it recently in the new Olympics, J.K. Rowling coming out and talking about that boxer who, it's really, so I was thinking a lot about Caster Semenya and having to prove yourself. And that was kind of part of the process as well. So I have all these kind of things happening in the background and things I'm thinking about. But I'm obviously also interested in kind of like the pharmaceutical industry. The company in Slipping is actually the same company that's in Moxieland, Initech. And I think it's also in another one of my stories, The Green. And is it in Slipping? Anyway, it's meant to be. It's all meant to be the same evil pharmaceutical company that really doesn't care and like wants to experiment on people. And to have this idea of kind of people being exploited and people tuning in to watch these games where they're basically tuning in to watch women explode, the same way people watch Formula One to watch people explode. And when I was in Detroit 2 weeks ago, I was with a friend of mine, and he's a Black American. I don't think I would describe it this way necessarily. But he talked about the analogy between kind of slave markets and the NHL draft, which is the big football. The NHL is the American Football League. And the fact is you have these very young men, like 18 to 23, their whole career is over. They sustain multiple concussions. People are trading them like Pokemon. all the big teams like trading them. And I just, there's a lot of like ickiness in sport that I kind of wanted to kind of look at as well. And then, I think, I just had this idea of this young woman, and then of course the church. And my dad had he was been telling me about this pastor who came to look at one of, my dad was an estate agent for a while, and he was looking at one of the properties that my dad was selling. And he was like, oh, this man was amazing. People were like there were women, he arrived in this Bentley in this very, very wealthy, like, very expensive car. And there were women in front of him and singing and throwing rose petals at his feet. I'm like, I don't think that's what a church should be. We shouldn't be worshiping the pastor. We shouldn't be worshiping the priest. And I just found it really creepy. So I wanted to kind of play with that as well and kind of look at how often these systems interact and interlink. So I never quite, I kind of know where the story's going. I know exactly who Pearl is, and I know where the story's going, but a lot of it is me feeling my way through it and kind of writing into it and seeing what happens, and then something will occur to me. So there's a lot of kind of weird stuff always in the back of my head, which kind of leaks through in interesting ways. I'm like, oh, that's how that fits together.
The next question is, can you tell us about the main character, Pierre Mitsuko, and what drives her? How did you approach her development throughout the story?
So Pearl Nseko is just, she's so fierce, and I know that word gets used too much, but she's really, really determined. This is something in her life which really matters to her. She found this thing that she loves and she's good at, and so for her to be able to kind of show off her prowess and to be able to like do this thing, and also maybe it's a way for her of getting out. And I think that is often the case again with people in poorer communities. Like your ways out are music or sports, or there are very few avenues where you'll kind of be suddenly discovered and like whipped away to a better life. So it was just kind of, and just the purity, I think, of just running, and just I like that Pearl is not so much in her head, that running allows her to get out of her head a little bit. And I think it's also, and so she's had all this determination, and then she suffered this terrible tragedy, but then she's been given the opportunity she always wanted, but it's at this terrible cost. But I think, at the end of the day, is she 20 years old in the story, something like that? She's young. You guys are young. And she's really figuring out who she is and what she actually wants. And maybe this isn't it, but she's committed herself to it. So it's kind of trying to find this, and also trying to reconnect with that love of running, which is so deep. But now she's on this world stage, and it's so weird, and everyone's had all these weird procedures done to them, and people are pushing her so hard, and she's kind of on this point of like breaking. But the one thing she knows how to do is to run, and it's one thing that's so pure and like in her heart.
In the short story Sleeping, religion plays a nuanced role in shaping the main character's identity and experience. How do you see the interplay between faith and personal struggle reflected in the story?
So I think so you said the church, I think was, yeah. So I'm an atheist. I think faith can be a really, really beautiful thing. I think the church that's in the story is not a good church. I think they are really manipulating her, and they're using her for their own purposes. But I do think that, so Pearl kind of has to find her own faith. And I think that's what we all do as humans. We all find our faith in different things, whether that is through religion or through, I don't know, social work, or our connection to other people. Like or maybe it's just your faith in yourself, or your faith in the natural world, and that we should fight for the things that we believe in, whether it's your faith in hope. So I think here, Pearl's having to connect to her very kind of own personal faith in herself, and like trying to find out who that is. And of course she does have a connection to the church, but I think she's becoming a bit kind of skeptical about exactly how that's playing out for her and what these people actually want. And it's not really kind of the teachings of the church that are playing out here.
So we think Pearl, the church uses her faith against her, and so She continues to fight against it, and she's really strong because she holds on to her faith, and that's amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely. So she's still able to like kind of hold on to that despite everything else. And I think that is true. I think everyone's faith is like deeply personal. Um,
For me personally, while reading that scene where she is gifted the wheelchair, I think that scene for me was extremely uncomfortable. I think you could feel that she was uncomfortable. So was that your intention to make that scene quite uncomfortable?
Absolutely. And again, kind of I wanted to look at these kind of different sides of churches. And again, I'm not saying that all churches are like that, but there are certain churches which can be really exploitative. And I think this is maybe the American model, is the churches that, even in like desperately poor areas where people are living in tin shacks where they don't have electricity, like people will give their money to the church. And again, the pastor will arrive in a fancy car. And I'm like, I promise you, this is not what Jesus wants. I promise you, this is not what God wants. This is like, he does not want the pastor to have a fancy car while you suffer. And so I really did want to make it uncomfortable. And I did want to make it that kind of showy expression of like, look at how beautiful and good we are. And God is kind. And, like now we're actually, but also, the pastor's not donating his own money. They've raised the money together. And then they've also kind of struck a deal with this bigger church and kind of the pharmaceutical company down the line. So it is supposed to be uncomfortable. It is supposed to be like, oh my God, what is happening? This is quite awful. And this kind of parade of charity, this performative charity.
Okay, so next question about sleeping. In that short story, the advanced technologies that were used on the athletes' bodies really highlight the intersection of innovation and human experience. So what inspired your portrayal of these technologies, and how do you think they reflect or critique our relationship with performance and physicality in a futuristic context?
There are so many people who use drugs in particular to increase their performance, from Lance Armstrong, who tried to destroy a journalist's career, who exposed him, through to, like there are rich white dads in Cape Town, where I spent the last 20 years. I'm now in the UK, who would take performance enhancing drugs to run a bicycle race with their friends. And I'm like, why would you do that? That's just so dumb. So I think, we've had a long history of using substances, and, people like I think it's an Ernest Hemingway quote, is it? Where it's like, right drunk, edit sober. I am drinking a cup of coffee right now. We use performance enhancing drugs all the time, to different levels. And I think I was thinking about like the cruelty of how sport can be. I think especially things like American football, where like, people really do get really badly injured. Ballet, acrobatics, cheerleading. I read a terrible article about cheerleading and how far girls are pushed, and teenage girls are being forced into these positions where they are, again, incurring concussions, which are going to give them brain damage and affect them for the rest of their lives. So I really kind of wanted to play with those ideas around things. I do think, but then on the other side, we've got like the Paralympians, and although Oscar Pistorius is a monster and a piece of hot garbage, the fact that we have blades now is amazing. The fact that we've come so far in terms of like innovation. But then on the other side, you have people like Elon Musk, and it is so embarrassing to me that the world's worst supervillain is a white South African man, because of course he is. But he's using this kind of brain, he's trying to do this Neuralink brain kind of connection. And this is a man whose cars explode. He's tortured monkeys to kind of put these kind of brain things in. And it's really, there's a lot of kind of disconnect and shift away from. So first of all, I don't trust big corporations who have their shareholders in mind, because they only want to make profits. And they're not developing the correct things for the right reasons. And it's the same with medication. ARVs, which is what you use to treat, antiretrovirals are used to treat HIV in South Africa, around the world. South Africa could not get hold of ARVs for like 10 years. We lost like hundreds of thousands of people died unnecessarily from AIDS because the drug companies were selling the drugs for such an expensive price, and we had to fight them. South Africa fought really hard to get them to release affordable generics. And insulin in America is like, I don't know, it's like $2,000 or something. It's obscene. And this is a drug which costs like 10 cents to make. So the fact is that these companies are always profiting. So we can't trust them, and we certainly can't trust them with our health. And I think the most incredible experience is to be human. It is to feel, it is to touch, it is to stub your toe, it is to have sex, it is to dive into a cold lake, it is to, ride your bicycle or laugh or cry. These sensations are what make us human. And absolutely, if you are differently abled and you need, blades or, an artificial arm or whatever, that's amazing. We should definitely like move towards that. But I think we need to keep our humanness in mind. And I think, again, the tech bros, it's very anti-tech bro rant. They want us to drink Huel. They're like, we'll just drink this one thing or just have this gummy and it'll have all the vitamins you need. And it's like, I love food. I love eating. I love sharing food with my friends. I love like the sensation and the taste and the flavor. And these are the essential things which make us human. And I think there are ways of being other kinds of humans. But I really think we need to hold on to our humanity, and it needs to be about that. It needs to be about wellness. It needs to be about function. It needs to be about our ability to access the world. And maybe that doesn't mean you get blades. Maybe that means there are less stairs or more elevators, and like we actually accommodate people more and think about that more. And I think this race to like have things tapped into our brains when this man can't build a car is a terrible idea.
And now a question about the TV adaptation of the novel Shining Girls. What is your first reaction when you learned Shining Girls will be adapted for television?
It was absolutely amazing. Like I didn't know what to think. Like it was like, is this happening? Is this real? Like it was really hard to process. But we had, I think we had like a 13-way bidding war. So we had like all these different companies pitching for it. And there was Leonardo DiCaprio and like his company wanted it, and MRC. But what you have to understand is that it takes a very long time, usually, for an adaptation to get made. And most adaptations never happen. Slipping has been optioned. I'm looking at re-optioning it at the moment. Broken Monsters has been optioned twice before. We're now on the third option, and I'm going to be writing it. A lot of times the option happens, which is where the company says, oh, this is amazing. We want to make it. Here is some money. Free money is my favorite kind of money. Always nice. And then they'll take a year and shop it around and try and get a script writer and try and get a director or a movie star involved. And maybe they'll get someone to write a script, but then it goes away and nothing ever happens. And then the next year they're like, okay, it didn't happen this year. Here's some more free money. We're going to try again this year. So you get some free money and they're like, oh, we're talking to this director or we're talking to this movie star. And you're like, that's amazing. And then nothing happens. And then maybe at the end of that year, they're like, okay, here's some more free money. We're going to try one last time. Or they're like, you know what? We're done. We don't want to try and make this anymore. It's obviously not working. And with The Shining Girls, it took 9 years to get it made. And it was an incredible process. I think the writer they got, Silke Louisa, is amazing. And also Elizabeth Moss came on board, the movie star. But I also, you're not allowed to tell about this stuff. So I knew that she was the actor involved for a year and I wasn't allowed to say anything. So, I told my friends and family and like swore them to secrecy, but that was about it. So I think it's a beautiful adaptation. It's incredibly smart. There's lines of dialogue I wish I'd written. It's gorgeous.
And how involved were you in the adaptation process?
So I had long chats with the showrunner, Silke Louisa, who was this young hotshot writer who'd, I think, something called The Blacklist, and she'd had a script on The Blacklist, which is this kind of prize for undiscovered screenwriters. So we had long talks about like what the book was about. And, it's a book about a time-traveling serial killer, but really it's much more about misogyny and how we talk about violence against women in particular. And yeah, I think especially coming from South Africa, where we have the 5th highest rate of gender-based violence in the world. I imagine Brazil's probably pretty bad as well. it really meant a lot to me to make sure that we actually spoke into those issues, and the reality is that most women are not going to be killed by a serial killer. We're going to be killed by the men who say they love us. So to use a serial killer as kind of a stand-in character for that hatred against women, for that kind of male sense of inferiority and humiliation, where they're acting out of like this kind of just, I think the most dangerous man is a man who's been humiliated or who feels that he's inferior. And that's very much kind of the character in the book and the show. So they started filming it, but of course it was in the middle of the pandemic and I couldn't go because I was in South Africa. We have the 5th highest rate of gender-based violence, but we also have some of the world's best epidemiologists. So every time a new strain of COVID came out, our epidemiologists and scientists said, oh, there's a new strain. And the rest of the world said, that's not African strain. You're not allowed to fly. I was like, oh, please, it's not our strain. We just identified it because we have really good scientists. Come on. So I didn't get to go to the filming. And then they were going to have a premiere and then they canceled the premiere because of COVID. And so I was living in London by that stage and my best friend made me have a premiere. We rented a small little local cinema. It was an old Art Nouveau cinema. So it was like really beautiful. It felt very atmospheric. And I had like 50 friends and family and we just had our own little premiere. And it was really cute. But yeah, so I think, in those conversations, it was very true to the heart and the guts of the book. There's some changes that they made that I think the book was better. I think there's some changes in the series, which I think is better. I think the character that Wagner Moura plays, Dan, the journalist, I think he's way better than the one I wrote. I'm like, damn it, that's a really, really good character. Yeah.
And how do you think the visual storytelling of the series enhances or alters the narrative from the book?
So the book, the model of time travel is it's closed circuit time travel. So whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You can't change the past. And in the series, they made it the multiverse. So actually, I couldn't read the scripts in the beginning because I was writing my new novel, Bridge, which is about a multiverse. So I was like, I don't want to like accidentally steal ideas. But also, I think the book is funnier. And maybe this is also a thing in Brazil. I'm not sure, but like I don't know how you guys cope with trauma, but in South Africa we make jokes, and they're dark jokes, but we have a sense of humor, and we're you know what it's like. So and they stripped out all the humor, and I was like, oh, like Kirby is a survivor, and she did have something terrible happen to her, and it is traumatic, and it is awful, and she is so determined, and she's going to find the man who did this to her and stop him from doing it to anyone else. But she's also funny, and she's witty and she's light. And I think they lost the lightness, which I miss. And I think that would have been really great. And then they only focused on like 3 of the women from the book. And I miss that the original book it's a lot of like history. There's a lesbian architect who's also a communist in the 1950s. And there is a trans woman who's a showgirl in the 1940s. And there's a Black American woman who's working in the welding in the shipping yards in World War II. And we lost all of those stories. And I was like, oh, I miss those. But I understand, even when I was writing the book, I had a list of other people that I was planning. I had all these other characters I was interested in. But I just got so sick of killing them. Because, I would introduce you to this amazing, cool woman who's maybe an abortionist in the 1960s. And she's this big strawberry blonde, and she's like, people think she's a bit dumb, but she's like really like she's helping women in the most desperate times. And then 3 pages later, I kill her. And I'm like, I can't go through this anymore. Like, I don't want to put readers through it anymore. I don't want to put myself through it anymore. And I understand why for a TV show, that is feminist, that is about trauma, you don't want to traumatize the audience. So I understand why they didn't go with kind of all the different characters.
I can't even imagine how that must feel for a writer to kill over and over. I actually watched the first episode. I plan on finishing, and I think Wagner Moura is perfect. I love him so much. He's
the
amazing.
Whole cast. Everyone is incredible.
Yes, I really love Elizabeth. I watched Handmaid's Tale. I think she's incredible. And just with the first episode, I kind of understand what you mean by she feels very witty and funny, but you can't really, that doesn't really appear very much. I think that would be very nice, but either way, I think it's an amazing show. I pretend to.
Absolutely.
Oh,
I'm so thrilled.
I intend to finish it. I think it's really the kind of series that I love to watch. So, and I intend to read the book. I think I got very interested. So now we want to read some comments that are in the YouTube Live.
Great.
So Annalise says, lovely and inspiring talk about writing. Hopefully it will inspire more curious and intelligent minds to give us more and more to think about. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
That's really nice. Let me see. Yes, that's the comment that we wanted to read. And now we're planning to just chat with you, ask more questions that pop up in your head, girls.
So I would like to add, we certainly share the same type of humor. As Brazilians, we also make jokes about sad things and the things we suffer a lot here.
Yeah.
And what else would you like to add?
I think that's so important, though, and I think it's so important that we're still human and we still need to and I think that's why I try and do in my books and my stories is I try and balance. There's a lot of darkness and horror, but I try to balance that with kind of the lights. And I think if you just have the darkness, I think it becomes emotionally exhausting. Yeah, but it's nice to know that we do have that kind of similarity and connection between countries.
At the start, you said something about the censorship going that's happening in the United States with their censoring books, and sadly that happens here as well. Public schools sometimes censor books. It happened not long ago, so we have that as well. That similar unfortunate event of censorship. Brazil also went through a dictatorship.
Yep.
In the 60s or 40s? 40s, in the 40s? 60s. I'm not very good with history, but also the censorship was very, very aggressive. So we have this past, so we understand what that feels like. But despite everything, as Gabriela said, we make fun. We're very we try to go by and go through with a little more fun in our lives.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really telling that censorship is kind of the roots of dictators and totalitarians and fascists, because it shows how much power there is in storytelling and art as a way of connecting us and helping us to think and to think differently. There's a quote I used to say when I used to give talks, especially when I was talking about science fiction and why it was powerful. Can I swear on your channel or not? I'll censor it. I'll just censor it. It's fine. So, there's that classic quote about how those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Well, I always say that those who cannot imagine the future are doomed to F it up. And we have to imagine the future. We have to be able to imagine a different kind of future. There's a really interesting idea I came across only recently because I don't have a very deep kind of education. Like, I have my master's in creative writing, but I didn't actually finish my bachelor degree. But a friend of mine who's an artist was telling me about this idea of hauntology. And hauntology is the idea that all our ideas, it was popularized by a British philosopher called Mark Fisher. And all our ideas of the future are based on our imagination from the past. So everything which is happening now, where we're looking at like colonizing Mars or robot vacuum cleaners, is based in the 50s, and what we need is a radical reimagination. of actually who we can be and what we can be. And Mars is not going to save us. Like, we need to save this world right now. And I think the fact that there is censorship and people like trying to repress those ideas and trying to repress us asking questions is really telling.
I believe we always make a way to surpass the censorship. And South African artists and Brazilian artists, they have this power to really connect to the people and make a way really
Yeah.
to speak out and so on. And when I was reading when I was reading Sleeping, I felt the religion so intimate, so personal, uh, that I felt like you were part of it, like an author. I was I was questioning. I was reading. Um, Maybe she's part of Christianity. I don't know. And I would like to know your contact with people that have this faith and what research did you do to write the short stories looking, because you use elements of this faith, right? And it's so intimate, I don't know, so real, right? And you talk about your personal experience that it is in the short story.
Yeah. I think, to come back to the character question that was asked right in the beginning, like every character is a seed of something in you that you grow into a tree. And it's not you, but it's an aspect of you, and it's an aspect of, and it might be the smallest part. In Harper, who is the serial killer in the Shiny Girls, is very cynical, and like he just thinks the worst of people. And you know what? There's a tiny part of me that is like that as well. So I just take that tiny, vicious, evil part of me, or like, this broken kind of part, and I just kind of grow it into that aspect of things. I think a lot of my protagonists are quite similar. I think they're quite, especially like the female characters I write. I think they're determined. I think they're stubborn. I think they're funny. I think they're a bit broken and trying to figure out how to be better. I think they make mistakes. And I think that's a lot of kind of personal stuff. I think, they're a little bit full of nonsense. I think Brazilian people are also probably maybe a little bit full of nonsense, the same way South Africans are a little bit full of nonsense. Not very good at following the rules, kind of pushing. Yeah, I think, I certainly could have done more research. I grew up, I went to an Anglican school, and I went to a interdenominational church. But I think I could have done maybe, and I think that was a strong enough basis. I think maybe I could have done more research into the differently abled community and into kind of Paralympians, and kind of spoken to people. And I think that's been a very valuable lesson I've learned in my writing, is that when you're writing about a group which you're not necessarily from, it's very important to get people to read that material and make sure that you're doing the right thing, and that you're not being offensive, and that you're not falling into easy cliches. So it's called sensitivity readers. I prefer the term authenticity readers, because a sensitivity reader implies that someone's being oversensitive, that they're like, oh no, you insulted me. But an authenticity reader is like, are you creating a character who is rich and full and kind of reflects kind of this community and like what this life experience is like? Have you created a full human being who is influenced by their gender and their sexuality and where they grew up and their class and, the kind of things that they've had to deal with in their life? And I think that's, to me, really important, is to create these rounded characters who have had life experiences, who are shaped by that. Certainly with, I was thinking of doing a differently abled character in one of my most recent books, but I spoke to a friend of mine who is, she's actually the first blind person to ever write the Marvel character Daredevil, who's actually blind. So it was very nice to have like a blind person writing a superhero. But I was talking to her about it, and I was like, okay, so this woman's going to be in a mobility scooter, and she's going to have like one artificial leg, and and everyone just kind of like thinks that they overlook her, so they can't. So she just kind of, she's basically invisible. And my friend Elsa was like, "Are you kidding me? You have been with me and my guide dog, because we worked on this Marvel project together and in New York." And she was like, "You saw how terrible it was for me. Like, some restaurants didn't want to let us in because I had a guide dog. Like that one guy like kept trying to come and pet my dog, and I had to keep telling him it's a working dog. Please don't interfere. You're upsetting the dog and you're upsetting me." She's like, "You are the opposite of invisible. You are, as a person who is differently abled, you are so visible, and mostly people think you're annoying because they're annoyed by the fact that you're causing them either discomfort or like, oh, why do you need this special thing? Why do you need to bring your dog into the restaurant? You know, it's completely unreasonable and it's not okay." But she's like, "Your character's not invisible. And also, there is a terrible trope, a terrible, terrible trope, where a disabled person is a villain. You know, so a person with facial scarring is a villain. A person with like one leg is a villain. And like their disability has made them, or their different ability, it has made them like a twisted human being inside." And she was like, "Please don't do that." And I was like, "Oh my God, I hadn't even thought about that. And you're so right. And I'm so glad I asked you. And I'm so glad I spoke to you." So I think it's really important to kind of check in with people and make sure that you're not causing harm, you know, that you're actually listening and engaging and understanding. And, you know, writing and fiction is an act of empathy and connection. And so you kind of need to get that base level empathy right, where you're actually like just not just imagining what it's like, but actually talking to people who've had that experience.
This is so true. Thank you. And there's another question in the chat. How do you interact with another African writers? Who else should we read from South Africa?
So actually, I have a list of people. It's amazing, but I've also just I'm still on Twitter, unfortunately, but I'm also on Blue Sky. I have linked both of those things. I'll send it to you guys as well. Maybe I can drop it in the chat. Hang on. So there are so many amazing like writers from the African continent. I think a lot of us know names, people like Nnedi Okorafor, who's obviously Nigerian American, or someone like Tade Thompson, who is a British Nigerian writer and won the Arthur C. Clarke Award for his brilliant novel Rosewater. But there is a bunch of like other amazing writers. And it's my friend Sam. She was at the panel event where I was with my friend Wole Talabe, who's an amazing Nigerian writer, and Tendai Huchu, who is a Zimbabwean writer. And we put together a list. I've dropped it in the chat. I hope we can share it somehow. Yeah, there are such incredible writers. Some of my other favorites are Masanda Nshanga, Mahali Mashiko, who is absolutely brilliant. She's a really good friend of mine. And there's an amazing writer, but her first book might only be understandable to South Africans because it's so steeped in a very particular culture, and there's a lot of slang languages, but it's amazing. It's called Mermaid Fillet by Mia Adern, and she has written from this point of just absolute female rage. So it's about poaching and ocean poaching in particular. Abalone is a very big thing, which a lot of people poach, and is very violent poaching where people get shot and killed over it. But she's made it about mermaids. And then there's this kind of like spirit of rage about kind of the violence against women that kind of comes through in the book. But so much of it is in this very kind of like beautiful and heavy South African slang. And I want everyone to read it, but I don't know if people outside of South Africa would be able to like actually get into it. Although, you know what, saying that, Irvin Welsh wrote Train Spotting, and it is written in the heaviest Scottish dialect. So maybe we just all need to try harder.
You mentioned Wally. He
Yes.
actually was interviewed maybe last week or the week before.
Yeah.
A group of our peers interviewed him, and that was really nice. So it's nice
so
that he seems like a very nice person.
He is, and he's so generous. He is so generous. And I think there are two ways to approach writing. The one is like, everyone is my rival and I have to fight them all off. Or the other is like, oh my God, like let's celebrate and like explore like, you know, what everyone else is doing, these amazing stories that everyone else is telling. And I think, you know, the literary world is very much based in England and America. Like that's how you make a living. is you get published in those countries. And if you're writing in a different language, in Portuguese, you're not necessarily going to get into translation. So it becomes really, really difficult. But then that also means that their tastes shape what kinds of stories the rest of the world is allowed to tell. And, you know, there's an amazing website as well called Africa is a Country. Of course, Africa is not a country. They're being very ironic with the title. But they had a beautiful article about the trouble with a single book cover. And they had this incredible blog post about how many African books, not even genre books, but like books about Africa, had an acacia tree on the cover. And I don't know what the equivalent in Brazil would be, but it's a particular kind of thorn tree which is only found in very particular areas. It's certainly not, you know, in like Cape Town or, you know, anywhere else. And it's just this idea of what Africa can be. And it's supposed to be stories about AIDS orphans and war and terrible violence happening to women and poverty. And actually, we want to be able to explore everything else and be able to kind of really engage with the complexity and richness of kind of stories from the continent. And, you know, sorry, Black Panther, but we actually do have cities in Africa. You know, Wakanda is a beautiful idea. I completely understand where it came from. I think Killmonger was right. But, you know, like there is such diversity and amazing invention and storytelling and philosophy. And there is so much richness in the continent that I really want to see more stories coming out and people being open to those kinds of stories.
There's another question in the chat. What can you tell us about your current and future projects? What's around the corner for Lauren Beukes?
So I am adapting Broken Monsters. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to talk about that. Never mind. Let's move on. I'm adapting one of my things as a TV show potentially, and I've got 2 new novels that I'm working on. I've got another original TV show project which I'm working on. So it's just kind of just finding fun, interesting things to write about. I can't talk about any of them really, I'm afraid. But two of them. One of them is kind of a social horror, and it's kind of very contemporary, kind of in the mode of like Get Out. Another one might be tangentially related to the Shining Girls. And there's another one where I'm really interested in kind of exploring more issues around kind of masculinity, and also kind of maybe writing in London where I live now. And I think it's really interesting to be an African writer coming from South Africa and having kind of that experience and coming into a city and being an outsider and kind of being able to look at the issues. And, you know, a lot of my books are obviously about America, and I lived in America for a short time, for 2 years. But I think you always come, I'm sure it's the same for Brazilians when you travel, you're coming as a Brazilian and you're coming and you're seeing things through that lens. And I think that hopefully makes me a more interesting writer.
So, you you're currently living in London, right?
Yeah, I've been here for 3 years.
And I so love your backyard. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. I was hoping one of my cats would show up. Do you want to see a cat? I can go get a cat.
Yeah, we would
All
love
right,
to.
you get a cat.
Mhm.
This is one of my cats. This is Ivy. So she came from South Africa. She's never seen a fox before, so she's very confused.
Oh, beautiful. So cute.
Yeah.
Adorable.
Really
We love cats, right?
Yeah.
we love cats.
My other cat is somewhere in the backyard. I don't think you can see him though. No.
Oh, there.
I don't know. He's out there anyway. But yeah. With his little tail here. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was such a delight. This was really fun. It was really amazing questions. Yeah. You made me just want to come and hang out in Brazil.
Yeah, we would love to see you here, and this interview means a lot to us. It was so special to talk to someone from other country, and that's amazing for us.
Yes, and a very great writer, which is even more special.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So to have this connection, and it's really nice.
I think it's just so amazing to have your work kind of read in other places, and that stories can travel and connect with people in like different ways. It's this incredible magic and this incredible privilege. So thank you. It's been really amazing.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks so much. This is wonderful. I'll see if I can find that comic for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before you go, or before we end here, I would just like to apologize for the beginning because my computer is kind
Please
of
don't worry. Honestly.
yeah, no computer. My real computer is like under repair. So, but I would like to thank you, and it's important, like the girls were saying, and it's very beautiful to see powerful women and you um, women talking and like inspiring other women to do the same, to be able like
I
to
hope so.
learn English, to talk to someone that they, so this was very beautiful to see this girl group and this amazing woman talking and sharing ideas. It was wonderful, and it's important for our project to do that. We are going to have, this was our fourth meeting for the literary talks, and in 2 weeks we are going to be back with a conversation in Portuguese about with some people that are that work for literary events. So we are going to be talking about literary events, the backstage, the secrets, and
Amazing.
what makes or like what is important for a literary event. Okay,
Yep.
so Lauren, thank you so much for your time, for your willingness to talk to us a little bit, and now it's like
Bye.